I'm in conversation with three people who spend their professional lives helping other people, basically, in a healing capacity. I'm here with Eris and with Tanya and with Marianne. And I just wanted to ask you first to introduce yourselves to each other and to me and just say a little bit about how you ended up in Pembrokeshire.
Okay. Shall I go first?
Go first.
Okay, I'm Tanya Peterson. I'm a kinesiologist. I became a kinesiologist in 2018, I think it was. I lived in London, brought up in London, lived in London for up till I was about, I don't even know, but I was an artist and worked in films and television and so making props. And then I had a baby and that kind of changed everything. And we moved to Wales at that point. And I just supported my husband in his business, he's a sculptor, so I supported him. And then as the girls got older, I started to follow my heart a bit more. I realised that that's what I really wanted to do, which was working in some kind of therapeutic modality, healing modality. I wasn't sure what it was, so I tried various different things and came to kinesiology that way. And yeah, that's sort of taken me on this extraordinary journey of training in various things that sort of branched out into various avenues, quantum energy coaching and the Palawa healing I was talking about earlier. And I love it.
And what actually is kinesiology?
Kinesiology is, in a nutshell, it's quite tricky to kind of boil down to a short explanation, but it's muscle. You use muscle testing. Muscle testing is the primary tool you use to communicate with the body and the subconscious mind, and through that conversation, you can find out what's going on with the body, where there's issues, where there's imbalances, what the body likes, what it doesn't like, what it needs to help it to get back into balance. So after you've had a sort of inquiry, a conversation with the body, you can then go about putting it back into balance. So working in the energy body, in the emotional body, the structural body, the mental body, and you do that. There's lots of different techniques to help you to rebalance. So that's particularly what I like about it, that it is truly holistic. It addresses every aspect of the body, because I don't believe that you can change anything in any one of those aspects of the self and it not be felt throughout the whole self, all those other aspects, because everything adjusts to accommodate that change. So it's like a sort of detective investigative thing that you do. And so every person who walks through the door is totally unique, biochemically, emotionally, physically, everything. And so it's just quite an exciting process of working with each individual person. Yeah, and I hope that explains what it is.
Definitely,
kind of. Yeah.
Marianne, how did you end up in Pembrokeshire? And your practice, explain to us a bit about your practice.
Okay, so I had a friend who had a place here in Pembrokeshire and was planning to move back, and so he had kind of asked me and my family, or me and my husband really, if we would come and help him to kind of get the place together and set it up, and he wanted to create some kind of a retreat space. And at the time our children were still quite young and in school and we had jobs, so we were interested and intrigued, but it wasn't the right time for us. But we would come and visit him and come and have holidays here. And we absolutely loved it and kind of had a wish or a desire that we might be able to one day be here. And then a series of events happened in our lives, which meant that we came to this kind of critical point where every single member of our family was at exactly the right place to make that transition in terms of work, school, age, etc. And so that was about 6 years later, and so we moved here, and been here and really happy ever since.
And how would you describe your practice, your healing practice?
When people ask me what I do, I guess I say I'm an energy healer. Fundamentally, that kind of encompasses everything that I do, because I have many strands to my work, but energy healer is how I would describe myself, because that runs through everything I do. So predominantly, I am a hands-on healer. That's the main kind of part of my work. And so I work with what I describe as the human energy field, or what people might be more familiar with as the aura. Although it's kind of a bit more than that, but that's the simplest way to describe it. And so my work is to connect with those different aspects of the human consciousness system, and to help to clear, charge, balance, restructure the whole field and bring it back into health. Because the energy field, or the human energy field, is like this interconnected system which is self-regulating, and it's set up to be to always move towards being in perfect health and balance. But obviously life and circumstances cause it to come out of balance. So my work is helping to bring the whole system back into balance. And so the different levels of the energy field are really also different aspects of our consciousness.
Yeah.
So in working with these different parts of the field, you also help to alter for the good a person's consciousness, their relationship to themselves, to life, to whatever they are facing. And also it can address issues of a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual matter. Doesn't matter what it is. And like Tanya, you were saying that if you influence one aspect of a person's energy field, it has a knock-on effect on every other part of that system, because it is interconnected. So it's a whole. And then also in my work, I also have an aspect to my work which is very much connected with, I'm going to say, the more earth-based part of our human expression, where we really connect with that more primal part of our nature, our connection to nature, the spirit world, the plant world, the natural world all around us, and all of the practices which have been passed down through indigenous traditions from every culture, really, because most indigenous people had a similar way of relating to the world around them. But I particularly focus on practices and traditions that come from the Americas.
Okay.
And so that's another aspect of my work.
Brilliant.
It's just allowing people to be able to express that part of their nature, which is outside of the confines of what we normally feel we're allowed to express in everyday life. That much more kind of raw and natural part of our human nature.
Wow. Brilliant. Ooh. And talking of the Americas.
Yes. And hailing from California. My name is Eris Gibson. I'm a certified massage therapist. I have done a training in visionary cranial sacral work. I've done various other trainings in shiatsu and Thai massage and sports massage and prenatal massage and deep tissue and polarity therapy and Reiki and various Esalen massage. I would say what I do is Esalen massage and integrative bodywork. So Esalen massage is kind of a package. It's a way, you know. And the integrative bodywork, I'd say I'm very much a body worker in terms of being kind of a technician. I love being an empathic mechanic. People come in and there's quite a bit of detective work going on. I've been to see you for a session, and so that detective work that you do is quite interesting, intriguing to me. And because everything I'm doing is very much kinesthetic. My USP is a kind of, a unique selling point, is a kind of sensitivity in terms of structure, pressure, finding things and meeting them without sort of like trying to force them out or missing them. So people often say that they feel met, I think, in the work that I do. That's on a physical level, but of course, you know, these layers of human. So it's on a physical level, on an emotional level. Intellectually, there's a quite a bit of checking in and out that I do with my clients. And so if they have questions or things they want to know about their body, they'll tell me a lot about their story. Or really what they're telling me are their conditions, which is interesting. That's what I'm listening for. And then I think when I started doing massage, I began to have a kind of, I don't know, there was maybe a spiritual language that came forward for me. I mean, maybe that started a lot earlier, but so I feel like the work that I do is very much body work, and yet it does seem to touch people on every level. I have a very well massaged cat. So my impulse is always, I love cats. I love a cat.
What was your journey to Pembrokeshire, though? Because you've had
that had nothing to do with massage, actually.
You've had the most convoluted journey
I have a very convoluted life.
and most convoluted professional career as well.
Yes. So I started out, my professional career in a way began when I was 12 or 13 years old. I was a very serious child. I was in an Army cadet program and an Air Force cadet program. I wasn't violent. I wasn't like a killer or anything. I was very much an idealist and very much about community. I think because my family situation was quite unstable, really. I think I needed some boundaries. I needed community. I needed good, I think, especially male role models, and I needed somebody to set some boundaries for me and some standards and test me, especially I think as a young man. And boy, I wanted to be tested physically. In terms of achievement, it's very easy. You do the right thing and you get a medal or a ribbon, or and these are your buddies, and we hang out every day. And so I was on drill team and drill platoon, and I was a company commander, cadet lieutenant colonel as a kid, and went eventually into the Marine Corps Reserve and the Army National Guard, and did those for about 9 years. But in terms of the convolution, I was a part-timer. So at the same time that I went off to the Marine Corps and then came back as a Marine Corps corporal, probably, I then also went to university, started taking magic mushrooms and LSD and ecstasy and smoking weed and things like that. So I was kind of living this double life where I was in the Marine Corps. I became a sergeant in the Marine Corps and an electronics technician, and then went on to the Army where I was a Japanese translator in the Army National Guard and a sergeant there as well. My last active duty assignment was at a language school where I was studying Japanese. And then when I got out, they want to give you some kind of job training. And so they offered me all of these things. I remember sitting down and doing a workshop, and the guy said, you can be a bloodletting technician, whatever, a truck driver or a teaching assistant, or, we'll pay you to do. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to get a job so I can go back to university. I never did finish university. I'll go back to university and get my degree in something, I don't know what, and this will be a good job instead of waiting tables or, being a bartender or whatever. And he said one of the things that we actually discourage, but we will train you, we will fund the training. And he listed a few things. One of them is massage therapy. I had never received a professional massage in my life. I'd never thought about receiving a professional massage. I'd never given a massage. I had no idea. But when he said massage therapy, I knew that that's what I was going to do. And he said, these are the things we discourage because they didn't have any clear job market statistics, And so I went and did my own research, found people who might hire me if I did a training. And it was like two wires touching. I just never looked back. A lot of what I've done in my life, I've done through some feeling. It was just a calling, the cadets I had no experience of that. And the Marine Corps, I just knew that was what I was going to do. What eventually brought me to Pembrokeshire was an eco-village project, which was a self-build, turn a sheep pasture into a homestead, permaculture gardens, and a self-built house, eco house type thing. And that was happening in Glandour here in Pembrokeshire. And that's what brought us from Bath. I came to Bath originally when I left California. And didn't really practice massage full time for a number of years while I was building a house and doing renewable energy and community stuff and all kinds of things, forestry work and whatnot. And then ended up separating from my wife, finishing the house that I was going to build for my family, moving them in, and then we separated. I moved into the village and began doing massage full time again. And I've always loved it. I will always do this work. I can't imagine retirement. I don't know what that looks like. Indeed, now at 48, I'm going to be delving into another 2 or 3 trainings that will take me over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, which, for me, I'm looking at the next 40 years, really, of doing this work. I've been doing it for 22 years now. I've been a massage therapist for 22 years. Is that an answer to these
Yeah,
questions?
that is definitely. So in terms of, I want to ask all 3 of you if you feel that your life experience as people of colour has affected your desire to help other people, or whether that is just something that you randomly wanted to do, whether that experience has any effect. Because I know that in my life, I'm very much about empowering other people, whether it's to sing or to dance or to, not that I'm a dancer, but to kind of flourish creatively in areas that they don't. And I do feel that for myself, part of me being abused and having a very strong sense of justice meant that I had a very strong sense of, actually, we all need to be loved, and we all need to know about our energy and our creativity particularly. So I feel that that's very important to me and my practice, whether it's empowering adults or children, and sharing information. But I just wonder if I feel that about my own practice, but I wonder if any of you think that that's at all a factor in what you do and in what called you to help. And I mean, you were called towards massage, but yeah, whether that plays a part at all.
I would say yes. I haven't really thought about it till you've asked now. Growing up, my father, he would go in. So I'm in all white Wales now, pretty much all white except for us. I grew up until the age of about 11 or 12. I grew up in a suburb of San Francisco, which was predominantly white. I think I was always the only black child, sometimes the only child of color in any class that I was in up to a certain age. There might have been a few others in the school, but we were all quite dispersed, really. My father would come into the school, and he was a semi-professional tennis player, and so he would talk about African Americans, historically how African Americans had access to certain sports and not others because of cultural, social, economic reasons. So he would do talks in the school. Basically, it was helping these white kids understand that black people exist. There wasn't. I experienced racism, but it was almost reflexive. These kids were clearly repeating something that their parents had said, and I was being told how to react to that. It wasn't necessarily a personal thing, So I did experience racism. People called me nigger, quite a lot, and I would fight, but it didn't have a personal. I didn't know why. I just knew that was what you're supposed to do when you hear that word. I didn't experience a whole lot of actual oppression. There are people, my parents' generation heard that word and it would be followed by violence, or, it could seriously be followed by violence, or, this drinking fountain is not for you, or something like that in America, I didn't experience any of that. Another thing my father would come and talk about in the schools was the civil rights movement. And he would recite Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream speech. And he would always kind of cry at the end, My father always spoke a lot about compassion. And I think he would speak about his suffering or his insecurity or things like that as a black man. My mother would talk about those things. So I guess if anything, my race probably connects me to that, some experience of suffering and some connection to others who have suffered, and the feeling of wanting to support people in their suffering or help relieve them of suffering. Personally, that's probably where my connection to a lot of that comes. My father was always talking about compassion, forgiveness and compassion, forgiveness and compassion, loving your fellow man, and I think that's his talk about that, he talked a lot about race in relationship to that. Whereas I'm a bit more post-struggle, I would say, in a way. So I feel that. In a sense, I feel blessed to be kind of post-struggle. I think about my ancestry a lot. When I'm working on the plot, I think about my ancestors who were sharecroppers and slaves. I have sung some of those songs that I got off the internet. I found these recordings of black laborers, and this was in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, that somebody had gone around recording all of these old songs before they died out, and I found myself singing them on the plot when I'm scything or digging or whatever, and then going, oh, right. Or sometimes finding myself, why am I working like my life depends on it? I remember one time being on the plot digging something, like I was digging my own grave, it was a drainage ditch or something. I was like, why am I doing this like my life depends on it? And then I went, oh, right. I remembered the story of my great-grandfather who died at 52 from heat stroke in the Louisiana sun. And apparently, in terms of my family lore, when he went down and died, leaving 13 kids, the overseer said, there goes my best nigga, And there's something of like, it's a horrific, and it's both a horrific and a prideful story at the same time. I guess wanting to help people might on some level come out of that, but I also realize I'm a bit misanthropic in the sense I kind of hate people. There's something I fear and despise and have a kind of contempt about people, I'm fearful sometimes in crowds, or I'm fearful of what somebody might be, how they might be judging me, or what their intent toward me might be. As a stranger, I love persons. I have this kind of capacity to easily fall in love with a person. And I just do that again and again and again and again and again. So there's something that I find hugely redeeming about the work that I do, the massage and body work that I do. I can't think ill of somebody really that I've massaged, had a proper session with, because there's always some point in that where we find essence, which is just so beyond, any ethnicity or anything like that, it's even beyond suffering, really. And so to find that essence in another person again and again and again and again and again and again is very nourishing, and it's very reassuring, I think, in terms of people. I'm comforting myself, I think, by the work that I do. I get skin on skin to contact all day long. The person that pays me gets an hour and a half of it, but I get 12 hours of it that day. I'm comforting these people. I'm saying, it's okay. I'm saying that to me. This is something about comforting myself. Educating, I'm hearing myself say this thing to this person. I'm going, all right, I need to hear that. And any facilitation of healing, I don't think of myself as healing other people in any way, but if self, in a way, is myself and the other, any healing I facilitate for that other is a healing for myself automatically. And I almost feel it automatically. It's so nourishing, healing. So I guess, there's something that is post-struggle about me, and I want to share that. There's another little bit that pops into my head, which is this trope. It's a very American thing, I think, but it may exist here in some ways. I was watching this film about conceits, different things they use in films, different aspects of filmmaking and little tricks and things and just little motifs that you would find in films. And one of them is the motif of the magical Negro. And you get that quite a lot in American films, whether it's Uncle Remus in the Song of the South, the Disney film. This is this kind of black man who's obviously completely harmless, comes out of nowhere, and his whole job is to entertain and be magical for this little white boy or these white children, really. And you see that again and again. Green Mile, the black man who has these magical powers, or the example, the Legend of Bagger Vance, where Will Smith in the 1930s, there's all these problems for black people in the 1930s, but his whole mission in life is to teach this white man how to play golf. And he steps out of nowhere. He's magical in some way. I do think I have a little bit of that currency amongst the population, especially it's primarily white people that I am seeing, certainly here in Wales. There's something of me being other, and I think in that sense, almost being a bit magical in that respect. I'm not what they would normally see. And And I think in some ways they were more willing to give themselves permission to be vulnerable with me, because I am so unlike perhaps their father or their brother or their uncle or their, something that would be more familiar to them. I think I'm a little bit more, they can project a little bit more magic upon me in some way. And so they're able to receive some magic, I guess, in their lives too. This is something that's occurred to me recently, thinking about today. But anyway, sorry.
No, it's good. What would you say, Tanya?
I was so involved, and that was just, I feel really moved. I've known you quite well, and it was just amazing to listen to you talk then, Eris. Fantastic. Wow. And there were so many things in it. I was got to think, my brain now, re-engage. Sorry.
It's a good job we can watch this back.
Wow, so for me, so firstly, when you said empowerment, that most definitely is something that is a primary part of what I do. I think teaching people about themselves in a new way and taking back that sort of authority, I don't know if that's the right word, but taking back their power and knowledge and understanding of themselves is so key, I think, to truly healing. And I can only do 20%. They sort of they meet me with their 80%, and then the magic happens. But I think that the empowerment is most definitely a huge part of it, the teaching. I didn't experience a lot of racism that I'm aware of, but I suspect that when I was really young, I did, because there are things that don't add up. There's memories that I've questioned, and there's uncomfortable feelings around things. So I think there was certainly things going on in my younger life in nursery school and so on, and it was rare to see a mixed race child around. And so there was certainly struggles in my nursery school, which is very limited memories. But I remember always feeling outside of groups and it's difficult to know what that is, whether that's a personality thing or what that is exactly, or if from the beginning I was sort of ostracized a little bit, and when I was very young and excluded, because those are my memories of being excluded in primary school, but in nursery. But I think I what's the word, when you overcompensate for that, so I would be very nice. Very, very nice. In fact, I was told I was too nice. Very nice, very charming, very, know how to please people. And that was a skill that I learnt really early on, how to do that. But in learning that, I also learnt how to make people feel better. And then I could see people quite clearly. I could see where that comes from, who knows, And I did have my own struggles, even early on, emotionally, and I think that deep sadness that I felt from a very young age, that nobody could really, I couldn't explain, that nobody could really help me with, where that came from exactly. It's very hard to say, And my father was from Sri Lanka, and he came over at 27, and racism was not talked about. So my mother's Norwegian, my father's Sri Lankan. Racism was not talked about in our home, and so I always believed that it was never an experience that they had. But then as I got older, as an adult, there were a few stories that sort of came. But I think what you said so eloquently, Eris, about having a currency of that being, I can't remember the word that you used, but that people coming to you, seeing you slightly different, slightly magical, slightly, I think there is an element maybe of that with me. I personally don't feel like I'm any different. Sometimes taken aback when I see a photograph of a group. Like, for instance, we went swimming recently at this quarry, and I looked at the photographs, and I've got long hair now, and I haven't ever had such long hair before. And I looked at the photographs, and I thought, who's that Indian lady sitting? She's got my swimming costume on. That sounds like I'm a little bit simple, but I just don't think about it. To be honest, I really don't think about it that much. But I do recognise that with some, that there is that element to their relationship with me on some level. And I think that, I'm not sure of it, but it was interesting you said that. And yeah.
I think it's interesting in the relationship that you and I have, because we were always on a certain level. We were always perceived by other people to be a certain person. And I think you and I have always had that very frank talking way of interacting with each other, because you went to college with my sister. So when I moved to Pembrokeshire, you were already here. And so it was quite soon after that I moved here that I met you. But you've never been somebody that I have seen from that angle, if you know what I mean. I've always approached you from a very different, from a very straightforward angle, as a sort of as an ally, a sister and ally, in which I can just be whoever my horrible self can be. I don't have to keep my God. It was really interesting though doing. I know I met you, Marianne, through the Welsh Government's Race Equality Action Plan consultations, and for me I was talking to quite a lot of people, and a lot of people felt that, particularly living in rural West Wales, you have to be the best version of yourself to show people, so that you not as a racism preventative measure, but you very much feel like you have to show that you are positive and interactive and dynamic, I think. And I think that's a really interesting thing to grow up with as a person of colour, not just in Wales but also in the UK. What about you? What are your experience of? Do you think that's a factor at all in what you do?
Well, it's a really interesting question, because again, it wasn't something I'd ever consciously considered, but thinking about it, I'd say, yeah, it's definitely been a factor. So I'd say that, like, I grew up in London, and I was born in the 60s, so racism was all around me, and whilst I may not always have had direct experiences of it, although I have had many direct experiences of it, it was definitely very much a factor of the culture growing up at that time. So it was kind of like you just learned to navigate your life with it, always there, ever present. And it was on the telly, comedy shows. At school, it was in the language, and it was considered normal. Whenever it was challenged, it would always be by people having real big confrontations. So there was always that, either you be really good and you don't say anything, or you just put up with it, or just accept it, or you fight and be challenging in that way. So there was always this kind of really polarised way of navigating through life. And then the community that I grew up in North London was quite a deprived area. There were lots of immigrant families, which it's interesting though, because even though there wasn't a huge black community, but there certainly was a black community and other ethnicities. Yeah, at my primary school, my memory is that I was one of the very few black children. I think in my class photographs, I'm definitely the only black child. And my experience of going through life, through education and lots of things that I have interests in and things that I participate in, as always being the only black face, or one of very few. So it's really interesting. So that's always been my experience. And naturally, that means that, there's always going to be that factor of racism in that, whether it's just that systemic racism that's just underpins all of the structures of everything that you are involved in. And again, I live in West Wales. I'm probably the only black face in my village where I live, in my community, and that's got its pros and cons. On the one, I suppose the cons for me being, lack of other people who look like me or have my experience to have that shared connection with. Also, just that I stand out wherever I go, and that can be lovely because, you know, everybody knows me, but then everybody knows everybody where I live. But in terms of how that has impacted on my choice of work, I'd say that on the one hand, it hasn't, in that I think I was always born to do what I do, and I would have done it under any circumstance. And on the other hand, yes, it's definitely influenced the work that I do. I would say that having had the experience of racism growing up and all through my life, that I think what it's brought out in me is a few things. One has been this sense of, it taps into something you said, Tanya, about, I can't remember what it was you said now, but this sense of being able to really read people because you always want to feel, you know, that feeling of wanting to be safe and wanting to not have to experience the pain of the overt racism. So trying to find, how do I relate to this in this situation or to this person so that I'm not going to have to face that head on and experience that pain of that rejection. And so one was about really knowing how to read situations, really knowing how to read people, and then you develop this sensitivity and this ability to tune in and know what's going on. And so that's really been helpful in my work. And then also another thing is, because of feeling that pain, is in those moments of being able to make a choice of, do I react to that pain and hit out and against it, or do I, or just do I feel the pain that's obviously in the other person? And so I think one of the things that helped me to develop was compassion. So compassion, for other people in their, I don't know, maybe they're not knowing, or even in their willful intent to cause hurt or harm, because it felt like there was this choice in life. I could either let life damage me, or I could let life make me stronger and more compassionate and a better person. And so I think on some level I chose the latter. And then in my family growing up, so my father was very political, and he was very much an advocate for black rights. And so this was something that I heard a lot of talk about when I was growing up. And also my siblings as well were, I don't know if to say they were very political, but they were tuned in and clued up. And I have some younger siblings, but my older siblings, you know, and their friends. So that influenced me. And then my mother, she was very, she was aware of all of this, but her stance was coming from a very Christian point of view. She was a devout Catholic, and she very much believed in that, love everybody and be kind and have those Christian values. So there was this kind of duality going on. And my mum, it wasn't just her Christian background. She loved people. She absolutely loved everyone. She was a natural healer, I would say, in that not only through her profession of nursing and midwifery, but also she had this natural ability to connect with people. And she was just drawn to being this person who would go out into the community and befriend people and take people in. And we always had various people living in our house. So I think through her I learnt also about compassion and how to connect with people, and also instinctively that wanting to heal in some way. Her healing, it was partly hands-on through her work, but it's also just through the way that she approached people and the way that she made people feel. And so I think I kind of absorbed a lot of that from her. And so as well as my own innate nature to be drawn towards healing and the natural world, that definitely influenced me. And so then in my work, what seems to come through is that being able to find like the common threads that unite people rather than the differences that separate us. And I really love that. So when people come, and Eris, you mentioned about essence. So it's like when somebody first comes in to your space, the healing space, or just when you meet someone socially, initially you see the external things, and as a human being, you may make certain judgments about that person, negative or positive, or just, expectations or assumptions about them. And then when you go into the healing space and you connect with their essence, who they are beyond all of that illusory stuff, it's beautiful. And then you recognise that is who we all are.
Yeah.
At our core. And so everything else, it's so much easier to see through that and work past it, and try and connect with people from that level. So yeah, I'd say my experience of racism has helped me to just to be able to tap into compassion, and to also hone certain abilities within myself. And also it's helped me to become empowered as to who I am, and feel really proud of who I am, strong in who I am, and to be unapologetic in that way, but also to kind of allow that part of me to shine in a sense. And what Eris was also saying about that magical quality. So like within the community where I live, I feel I've never heard that term before, and I really like it. But yeah, it really makes sense to me. And I feel that probably is the case, in that I am very other. And so for people coming to see me, as he said, that ability to feel safer to be authentic, because you're not constrained by all of the regulations that society that you've grown up in has placed upon you. You can just be yourself and step outside of that.
It's really interesting that everybody's mentioned their parents in this. And for me, my dad was sent over with a massive trunk, age 6, to boarding school from Nigeria. And his name is Bamikolu Oluseun Bliss Adeshigbin. So his initials are B.O.B. So everybody called him Bob. That was his name. I remember a guy coming to the door when I was a kid and saying, "Is Robert here?" And I was like, "Who's Robert? I've never heard of this Robert," because that was the abbreviation for Bob. But he was the person that fit in everywhere. That was his role. He was the, jolly, and people would make racist exclamations, and he'd say, "Well, what about me? I'm black." And they say, "Yeah, but you're all right. We know you." It was always that with my dad. And my mum, having married a black man in the 1960s and been spat at, and having to be the one who made the phone calls about getting accommodation, and then having to tell them, "Oh, my husband's black, is that going to be an issue?" And then people putting the phone down and stuff like that. There's sort of all of those things. She never felt that she fit in, and she always felt that other. But ours was always the house where people went for meals, and all of my friends, the next generation, congregated. So it's very interesting the role that our parents very specifically have played in all of our, whether it be not talking about racism or being, my mum was very much about empowering me and my sister to do what we wanted to do. So I'm really interested in the generational thing with that as well. But also wanted to talk to you about wanted to come back to you on the post-struggle thing, because I'm loving the fact that
gets me in trouble.
Well, I'm loving the fact that you are blissfully unaware of what's happening 5 minutes down the road. No, I'm just really interested.
Yeah, what's happening 5 minutes down the road?
Well, I'm talking to some young creatives who are part of this series of films, and the racism that they growing up in the last 16, 17, 18, 19 years is really interesting. In fact, in the Race Equality Action Plan consultations, I only spoke to one young person who hadn't experienced racism. So I find your use of the term post-struggle, I do think in the last 18 months following the death of George Floyd, things have changed. There definitely things have shifted, but I don't know that I would ever use that term post-struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, post certain mini struggles possibly, but it's been about 10 years. No, it's probably been about 20 years since I was spat at in the street.
Right, yeah.
So that's quite pleasant. It's quite nice.
Yeah.
But I was just talking to someone this morning and saying that because of the colour of my skin, if I go into a Welsh setting, that people always speak to me in English. They never speak to me in Welsh. So I'm just interested in sort of that. And I'm also very interested in the indigenous, this connection to indigenous spirits and indigenous peoples and indigenous lands and that connectivity to nature as well, because that seems to be a theme. Yeah. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on any of that. Feel free to if you want to.
What me and my sister have in common is we both came home at the age of 5 from schools that were pretty much 90-something% white and said to our mother, I want to be white. We're 7 years apart. She didn't see me do that. I didn't see her do that. But at 5 years old, we came home and said, I want to be white. That's the last time I ever had that thought. I don't remember having that thought. My mother had to tell me about it. I love being black. I love it. I love the color of my skin. I love my heritage. I love African-American culture. Its dynamism, which is born out of deep pain, struggle, and insecurity. Something that's changing all the time. It's changing all the time because it doesn't really know what it is. It's making it up as it goes along. So I love that about myself. Otherwise, I don't have a deep identity with being black. I mean, I'm aware of it. I wouldn't look at a photograph and go, who's that? But which I think is fantastic. I think I probably experienced that in other ways, I will be kind of surprised. I love being other in a lot of ways, I'm definitely the only black in the village. And I've been that for a long time now. I think where I live and the community that I'm in, we're all a bit eccentric. The eco-village, especially in that area, has attracted a lot of characters. And so everybody, people dress like pirates or, it's like they're just wacky folk, It's like I tried to go to the tea room at this fancy hotel in, what's that when you go to tea at some place that starts with an S?
Slebich, is it?
I can't remember. It was one of these fancy hotels, and I was wearing some kind of like hippie garb. I thought, well, it's nice hippie garb. It's a Tibetan coat with some nice. They're like, no, a coat and tie. They're like, you have to wear a suit. I'm like, all right, I put on this suit. It's so boring wearing a suit.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've got the best of all of these worlds. I've got 3 kids who are mixed race. Their mother is English and French something. I'm American and African American. I'm an African American. They grown up in Wales in an eco-village in a hobbit house where tour groups have come through filming them. They've got 3 passports each. They've got, what I mean? They've gone to Steiner School, they've gone to state school. It's like, this is the future. In 500 years, everybody's going to look like my kids. Everybody's going to look like you. In 500, do you know what I mean? It's entropy. That's what nature does. It loves diversity. I was married to a woman who's blonde with blue eyes. I dated Asian women when I was growing up in San Francisco. I've never dated a black woman, which is odd to me. I think black women are gorgeous. I've never had any animosity, and I'm kind of, what is this about me? It's just different. I'm some agent of diversity. I just want something different. I want to be around different. I want to be different. I just want different. And I think that's one way to almost like subvert racism in a way. I do feel a bit subversive in that way. And so if I were to have a podcast, I'd probably call it the Post-Struggle Nigger Podcast. You would get a lot of views. And I want to host it. I want to co-host. And the co-host I have in mind...
I think we've got to make that happen. We've got to make that happen.
The co-host that I have in mind is a dear kind of... He's kind of dear but distant friend of mine. He's much younger than I am, probably early 30s or something. And he's a young white man, and he's kind of angry. You know, he tried to commit suicide a few years ago. Very well educated, very clever, very middle class actually. But he's part of this trend, this wave of disaffected young white men. You know, you think, oh, you've got it all. You know, you're the next generation of powerful leaders or whatever. And you hear him talk, and it's like, he missed the boat. He's like, yeah, not for him. You know, it's not just about being white anymore, just being a man anymore, you know. And it's funny because I want to do this podcast so that this young white man has a platform to speak, have his voice heard, you know. But it would be deeply ironic, I think, in that respect, because I do see a kind of an irony in it to some degree. I find it difficult sometimes to talk about this because I think I'm going to get myself in trouble because there are so many people of color suffering in this world right now because of their color. Yeah. You know, not just because of their other circumstances, but because they are black or because of whatever their ethnicity is. I feel like I don't feel like I've ever, after a certain age, I think after kind of getting out of primary school, really, from high school onward, I don't know that I've ever suffered from being black. I don't think I've ever been disadvantaged from being black. Indeed, I think there are so many opportunities that have come my way since then. To some degree, I'm part of a generation where America was trying to compensate for its brutality in the past. So I may have actually benefited from certain things like affirmative action or certain quota systems for admissions to certain things, or when I went to Marine Corps boot camp, I was in a platoon with 80 guys. It just so happened that all 4 of my drill instructors were black. That's unheard of. And they looked at me, who was the former cadet. I came saluting, you know, they're like, you're going to be honor man. You know, they put me right in front and put a guidon in my hands. And they were like, you are going to be, and I graduated number 1 out of 620 graduating Marines.
Of course you did. Wow,
I was the honor graduate for that. And it was part of that push. It was something that I wanted to both prove and show, as well as like dismiss. Like, it doesn't matter. And
but then with you, I'm always trying to reconnect you to Africa, to the continent as well. Yeah. Because you are very you're really very removed. Californian.
And this is part of the post-struggle aspect, is I'm 10 generations on the move. In a sense, I can be whatever. I can make it up as I go along. I want to share this goodness, I think, that I experience. That's something that, and the post-struggle thing is not necessarily connected to race for me. It's about eliminating the struggle in my life. You know, I've done lots of journey work and shamanic work and things like that. I've for a Black American, I think my path, my activities, my interests are a lot different than a lot of my family members, for example, who wouldn't necessarily get massage or get energy healing or go on a shamanic journey or do a sweat lodge or an ayahuasca ceremony or, you know, all of these kinds of things. You know, Black people don't ski, you know, Black people don't camp, Black people don't like animals, Black people don't swim. You know, there's a lot of stuff that Black people in America say. I do all of those things. You know what I mean? And I don't know, I do. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question at all.
No.
But yeah, I do feel like there's an opportunity to really make it up as I go along, and I think to some degree, disconnecting myself from some idea that I personally am being oppressed by anything is a huge part of that for me. I wouldn't deny anybody, and it was interesting to have dinner with you and a good friend of ours who had put on Facebook, All Lives Matter. And do you remember? We talked about that.
Yes, we
did. And the nuance of that. And I know you both I know him so well. I know where that's coming from in him. He's the only person I think that could probably say that with some integrity.
And still be sitting at a dinner table with me.
With you. That's why, the words were said, but heads didn't roll. And I think there's something about that nuance of understanding I know that my life matters. I absolutely know that. And somebody can come along and try to tell me different. But yeah, I've had to dig deep and find this unapologeticness about my blackness, and my interpretation and experience of that too. I don't want to apologize, but yeah, I have to. I have to stay connected in some sense to this suffering, which is different than struggle.
Yes.
In a sense, the suffering connects us, and I think binds us. But it's different than struggle. The Buddhists say all life is suffering. So if I'm struggling with my suffering, that's a long road. You know what I mean? The Latin root of suffering, suffere, just means to bear a load. There's no negative, it doesn't have anything to do with pain. It's not, So what I bear is that I'm here. I exist as this. I have to be something. That's my suffering in a sense. I have to be this. Whatever this is, I get to wake up and be this. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. I've got to be this. And so I'm looking for a post-struggle reality. Coming back to Obama, at first he was criticized and ridiculed by a lot of black civil rights leaders in America for having just come out of nowhere, and being mixed race at the same time, but being called black, at that time. So that's there's so much nuance in all of that if you really look at it.
I've always been called black. I'm dual heritage.
Yes.
And I've always been called black. And then when I went to Nigeria, everyone's like, you are going home, and everybody called me Oimbo, white woman. I was like, okay, thanks for this. Talk about trying to find a sense of belonging and where do I actually fit in the world? Well, clearly nowhere.
Somehow I have found a deep sense of belonging in very rural, very white West Wales. I don't know what that's about. Although there is this connection of Welsh surnames and African-American surnames I find really, really interesting. I've never found an answer for that. Many stereotypical African-American surnames are what would be traditionally Welsh. Williams, Evans, Jenkins. These are all, in my family, all these names. They would have been the names of the surname of the last slave owner of that person, and it's like kind of overwhelming. There's a lot of Welsh black people, black people in America with Welsh Welsh surnames. So that's an interesting mystery.
We'll explore that. Yeah. We can explore that in the podcast.
Another day.
And turning to you, Marianne, about what you said about the connection to Indigenous people.
Oh, yes.
I'm really interested in the part of your practice that relates to Indigenous people, but the practices of Indigenous people that related to nature.
Right. So, let's see. How do I'm trying to think where to start this story, and so I follow a path which comes from the Indigenous practices of the Americas, and part of that path involves practices which really deepen your connection to the earth and nature. So you mentioned sweat lodge, for example. That would be one of the things, practices or ceremonies, you could call it, which is part of this practice. Things like going off and doing vision quest, where you are taken off into nature and left on your own for periods of days to just connect with yourself and with nature and the natural world around you, and kind of call for a vision. Connecting with the elements and honouring those and recognising, and it's about also recognising that all of these things are a part of ourselves. We're not separate from them, and not only do they influence us, but we have the same messages, the same energy, the same rhythms and cycles within ourselves. So it's really about reconnecting us with ourselves and all of the things around us that actually nourish us and sustain us and hold us in this life. But obviously modern life and particularly in the West and other cultures like that, we're so disconnected from that and separated in the way that we live and everything that's been imposed upon us. And so I love these practices that I do because it really taps into that part of our nature which is natural in everybody. If you left a small child to its own devices, it would totally be feral, But we're so domesticated And so it's like rewilding us in a sense.
I think that's really interesting in terms of where we are going in terms of the environment as well, because now we're looking at indigenous communities who lived for thousands of years sustainably on the land, who throughout my lifetime anyway have been belittled and primitive. The words like primitive, tribal, kind of associated with a bit stupid. But actually, to not take the oil out of the ground or the gas out of the ground or any of those things and to live sustainably is actually what we're all now seeking to backtrack frantically to claw back. Is there anything else that anyone else wants to say in the general conversation?
To me, that's one of the beauties of being, I feel, as a black person, and with my heritage in Africa, I do feel, and also when I look at African American, and even like slave culture, the songs of the black American church, that kind of thing, I feel much closer to a sort of indigenous and shamanic past. If you think about the progress of the West, let's say, Europe, and especially, it's kind of an eradication of shamanic cultures, really, which are cyclic. It's all cyclical. So this sustainability, this kind of permaculture, there's no presence of an idea of progress. Like the idea of progress, the meme of progressing or growth in that way, is pretty new, Whereas shamanic cultures would have lived. And any culture more connected to the land would have lived very cyclically. It would have gone like this. There was nowhere to go. You go up, you go down. That's it, really. So I do feel like I bring that from my heritage, perhaps, to that. Yeah, being in the black church and watching people, speak in tongues or just go crazy with the dance or something like that. Just, and then to be kind of an Anglican church and be singing these very staid hymns. It's like, I do feel like there's something about letting loose on some level that I feel a bit more connected to. And through that letting loose, cleansing, actually. Cleansing. And then you go back out there and do it again. But then there's a cycle, you cleanse again, so that's that feeling of connection to that. Anyway, that's what came to me when you were saying all that.
I think it's just so interesting listening to you both talk, and lots of things pop up and then they go because something else happens. So, but I think the heritage is such a, I believe quite strongly that I am within me there is a knowledge that's come from all those that have come before. And I know in Sri Lanka, along that family line, there were Ayurvedic healers and doctors of various modalities, and modern medicine doctors as well that were significant in their work, and then spiritual people who really followed the spiritual path in my heritage too. And I feel that connection in me very strongly, and I'm hugely grateful for that, and feel when I discovered that, it was very reassuring. It felt like, I'm not making this up. This is real. This really is part of me. It allowed me to own it, and I really liked your point about sort of making it up. I'm free to make this up, and I could see that reflected in my girls. And there's a struggle with that as well. But there's that. I fit in actually in many places because I don't fit anywhere.
Yes.
I can go, as when I was younger, I used to go on holiday with my white friends, and more often than not, they stuck out like sore thumbs. But I was the one who fitted in because we would be going to Turkey or Greece or, all these different countries, and when it was noticeable when I went out on my own, nobody batted an eyelid. When I was out with them, all kinds of manner of trouble came about, followed hassle. I was by myself. They just totally ignored me. It was great. So I had a freedom in all these different places and a sense of belonging that was just great. And I'm not confined by any ideas that I should conform in any way or some sort of there's such a mix within me. And as I've got older, I've really recognised that and been really grateful for that freedom that's allowed me. There isn't a confinement or a limitation in those ways. There's limitation in myself, my own beliefs and so on.
Yeah.
And there's those things that I've worked very deeply to resolve. And whether those come from being treated differently, it's very hard to say exactly where those originate. But that excitement about making it up, I'm free to, and I see in my practice that others aren't. They really aren't, and not just my practice, but all around me. Actually, people are very they don't want to disappoint the family. They don't want to. They got to toe the line. They've got to, they're repeating certain patterns, and I don't need to do that. There's nothing in me that feels I need to do that in any way. I can make it up, and there's great freedom in that and excitement in that.
That's really interesting because in my voice work, I always felt like I was the choir leader that didn't fit in because I don't read music and I wasn't able to name the notes. So someone would say, "Oh, the end of that line, is it a C or is it a B flat?" And I'm just like, I don't know, because my musical brain does not work in that way. So everything that I do is and teaching by singing to other people. And when I arrange things, when I arrange songs for myself, that's exactly what I do. So that's really interesting to transpose that. And I am free to make it up. But I do feel that it's taken kind of the world events of the last 18 months for me to feel, actually, if I am listening to some amazing music in my car that might hail from Zimbabwe and I'm at a traffic light, then I can actually dance, and that's fine to live my black best life in rural West Wales. And if people stare at me, actually, I don't care, because I really want to dance, because this is a great tune. And I'm noticing those things in myself, that I am actually freer to kind of really be who I want to be. So that's...
And I feel that freedom for myself has been hard-won freedom of all the years of the internal struggles, the external struggles, but finally reaching a place of, being at peace with who I am. And I guess that's come with age in a sense, and a kind of a sense of, fuck it, I'm me, and whoever doesn't like it, that's just too bad, whether it's my family, my community. Because there's, growing up, there's been, all these expectations that come from your community in terms of, the black community, the white community, your school, your job. I worked in the NHS for many years, and you have to conform in that setting. You have to conform as a black person within the black community. There are particular things you can do, you can't do, how you can be, what you can like, can't like, who you can like, who, And it's at the end of the day, just coming to a point of thinking, wait, hang on a minute, I'm not doing this anymore. And like you say, I think the last 18 months have been really great and instrumental in feeling that, life's too short as well.
Yeah.
And hang on, I'm an adult, aren't I? I can make these decisions for myself, and it's my life. No one else is going to live it. And so, that freedom of just suddenly recognizing, but having the courage to live it. And I'm going to live my life being who I am. Yeah.